What if I told you that the most humiliating moment of my life actually turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me? When my sister-in-law said, "If you disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice." At our family barbecue, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Challenge accepted." What happened next shocked everyone, including me. I'm Marissa, and I need to tell you about the moment that changed everything. It happened at my husband's family barbecue last summer. One joke, 7 words, and my entire life flipped upside down. Picture this. I'm standing at the picnic table holding a plate of potato salad trying to join the conversation, like I have for the past 8 years. My sister-in-law Natalie is holding court as usual and everyone's gathered around her like she's some kind of comedy queen. I had just mentioned something about my new marketing job, nothing major, just trying to be part of the group. And then Natalie looks right at me, gets this little smirk on her face, and says, "If you disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice." The entire table erupted in laughter. Even my husband Marcus chuckled into his beer. Even his parents. Even the neighbors who barely knew me. Everyone thought it was hilarious. Except me. I stood there, fork halfway to my mouth, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut. But here's the thing that really got me. Nobody stopped laughing. Nobody said, "Hey, that's not cool." Nobody looked uncomfortable. They all just kept laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. And that's when something inside me just clicked. I set down my plate, looked Natalie dead in the eye, and said the 2 words that would change my life forever. Challenge accepted. The laughter died real quick after that. I walked straight to my car, drove home, and started packing. Marcus found me 3 hours later, suitcase open on our bed closet, half empty. He kept asking what I was doing, where I was going, why I was being so dramatic over a simple joke. But it wasn't just a joke, was it? It was 8 years of being treated like a guest at my own family gatherings. 8 years of being talked over, dismissed, and made to feel invisible. 8 years of convincing myself that maybe I was just being too sensitive. Well, guess what? Natalie was about to find out exactly what happens when somebody like me actually disappears. By midnight, I was driving away from the only life I'd known for nearly a decade. No forwarding address, no explanations, no looking back. And you know what the crazy part is? She was right. For a while, nobody did notice I was gone. But what Natalie didn't count on was what would happen when I finally came back. Let me tell you that story because, honey, it gets good. But let me back up and tell you how I got into this mess in the first place. Because trust me, it didn't start with that barbecue. That was just the final straw. I met Marcus my senior year at State. I was working the night shift at the campus coffee shop, pulling doubles to pay for textbooks while studying marketing. He walked in around midnight designer everything, looking like he owned the world. Most guys like that I would have rolled my eyes and ignored. But Marcus was different. He actually talked to me like I was a person, not just the girl making his latte. We started with late-night conversations over my textbooks. He'd help me study, I'd make him free coffee. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. By graduation, he was down on one knee with a ring that cost more than my mom made in 6 months. I should have paid attention to that red flag right there. But when you're 22 and someone's promising you a fairy tale, you don't always think straight. See? I grew up in a tiny apartment above my mom's hair salon. Dinner was whatever we could stretch into leftovers. Christmas presents came from the dollar store wrapped in newspaper comics. My mom worked her butt off just to keep the lights on, and she raised me to be grateful for every single thing we had. The Hartfords. They lived in a different universe. Their house looked like something out of a magazine. Marcus's dad, Richard, ran some big investment firm downtown. His mom, Patricia, spent her days planning charity galas and decorating their vacation house in the Hamptons. And Natalie, she was already climbing the corporate ladder at Daddy's company, destined to take over the family empire. The first time Marcus brought me home for dinner, I wore my nicest dress, the one I'd bought for job interviews. Patricia took one look at me and said, "Oh, how sweet. You dressed up. like I was a little kid playing pretend. That should have been warning number 2. But the worst part, Marcus didn't see it. When I tried to tell him how his family made me feel, he'd just say, "They're not trying to be mean, Marissa. That's just how they talk. You'll get used to it. Get used to it." Like being dismissed was just part of the package deal. The microaggressions started small. At our engagement party, Patricia introduced me to her friends as Marcus's little girlfriend from school. Not fiancée, girlfriend. At our wedding, Natalie's maid of honor speech was basically a highlight reel of all the other girls Marcus had dated. More sophisticated girls, better connected girls. When we bought our first house, a modest 3-bedroom in a nice neighborhood, Richard actually asked if we were sure we could afford the mortgage. In front of the realtor, like I hadn't been the one crunching numbers and managing our budget for 2 years. But you know what had kept me sane through all of this? My friend Claire. Claire and I met in freshman orientation, and she was the only person who saw through the Hartford charm from day one. She'd come to family dinners, and afterwards she'd look at me and say, "Girl, you know, they're doing that on purpose, right?" Claire came from money too, but different money. Old family, quiet wealth, the kind where you don't need to prove anything to anyone. She could spot fake politeness from a mile away. "They're threatened by you," she'd tell me over wine. "You're everything they're not. You're real, you work for what you have, and deep down they know their son chose you over all their hand-picked princess candidates." I wanted to believe her so badly. But as the years went on and the comments got sharper and Marcus got more distant, I started wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I really didn't belong in their world. Maybe I was just the charity case Marcus picked up in college and never had the heart to get rid of. That thought haunted me for years. Right up until that barbecue when Natalie finally said out loud what I'd been afraid they were all thinking. Little did she know she was about to give me the biggest gift of my life. But before I get to the barbecue that changed everything, I need to tell you about the moment that almost broke me completely. The moment when I realized just how alone I really was in that family. Last spring, I lost a baby. We'd been trying for 2 years, and when I finally got pregnant, I was over the moon. Marcus was traveling for work constantly, but I thought maybe a baby would bring us closer together. Maybe give me a real place in the Hartford family. I was 12 weeks along when it happened. Marcus was in Denver closing some big deal. I called him from the hospital sobbing, barely able to get the words out. You know what he said? "Should I come home? I mean, if you really need me to, I can catch a red eye." If I really needed him to, I told him I'd be fine. That's what I always said. I'd be fine. The next day, Patricia sent flowers. Beautiful arrangement, must have cost $200. The card said, "So sorry for your loss. Perhaps it's all for the best until you're more settled in your career." All for the best. Like losing my baby was some kind of blessing in disguise. But Natalie's reaction was the knife that really twisted. She came by the house 3 days later bringing takeout Chinese food like that somehow made up for everything. I was still in my pajamas, hadn't showered, could barely keep it together. She sat at my kitchen table, picking at her lo mein, and said, "You know, Marissa, I've been thinking, all that stress from trying to build your little marketing business while Marcus travels so much, maybe that contributed to what happened. Your body was probably telling you it wasn't ready." My little marketing business, the one that was actually bringing in more money than Marcus's salary some months. I just stared at her. This woman who'd never been pregnant, never lost anything meaningful in her entire privileged life, was sitting in my kitchen telling me that my miscarriage was basically my own fault for having ambitions. That night, after she left, I called Claire. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. "I can't do this anymore," I told her. "I can't keep pretending this is normal. I can't keep making excuses for them." Claire drove over in the middle of the night, found me on my bathroom floor still in those same pajamas surrounded by tissues and empty ice cream containers. She sat down next to me on that cold tile floor and said, "Honey, I've been waiting 5 years for you to say those words." We talked until sunrise. Really talked. about how the Hartfords had systematically made me feel smaller and smaller, how Marcus had chosen his family's comfort over my dignity every single time, how I'd been so busy trying to earn their love that I'd forgotten I was worth loving exactly as I was. You know what the crazy part is? I told Claire as the sun came up. I keep thinking if I just try harder, if I just prove myself enough, they'll finally accept me. But they don't want to accept me. They want me to disappear. Claire grabbed my hands and looked me straight in the eye. So, disappear, she said. But do it on your terms. That conversation planted a seed. For months after that, I started paying attention differently. Really watching how they treated me versus how they treated everyone else. Marcus's new promotion came with more travel, more late nights, more reasons why he couldn't be present for our life together. And I started planning. Not consciously at first, but little things. I updated my resume. I started saving money in an account Marcus didn't know about. I reached out to old contacts from before I'd shrunk my world down to fit theirs. I told myself I was just being practical. Just preparing for whatever came next. But deep down, I think I was preparing to disappear long before Natalie gave me the perfect excuse to actually do it. So that brings us to the barbecue, the annual Hartford Summer Spectacular that I'd been dreading for weeks. Every year, it was the same production. Patricia would spend a month planning the menu, hiring caterers, making sure the lawn was perfect. Richard would show off whatever new toy he'd bought that year. This time it was some imported Italian grill that cost more than most people's cars. I spent 3 hours that morning making my grandmother's famous peach cobbler, the one dessert that had actually gotten compliments at previous family gatherings. Marcus was on the phone finalizing details for his trip to Singapore, barely acknowledging my existence. When we pulled up to the house, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The perfectly manicured lawn was already dotted with guests, the same crowd as always. Richard's business partners, Patricia's charity friends, a few neighbors who treated the Hartfords like local royalty. I walked in carrying my cobbler, wearing the navy sundress I'd bought specifically for this event. Patricia greeted me with that fake smile I'd learned to decode years ago. "Marissa, darling, you look lovely. Did you make something for dessert again? How thoughtful. Did you catch that? Again, like bringing food to a family gathering was some weird quirk of mine instead of, normal human behavior." The first hour was the usual dance. I tried to join conversations that immediately shifted away from me. I helped set up the buffet until Patricia gently redirected me to just enjoy being a guest. I watched Marcus work the crowd like the natural politician he was, charming everyone while completely forgetting I existed. But then something happened that caught me off guard. Patricia's friend Susan actually asked me about my work, real, genuine interest. "Marcus mentioned you're in marketing now," she said. "What kind of projects are you working on?" For the first time all day, I felt a spark of excitement. I told her about my latest client, a local nonprofit that rescues shelter animals, how I'd redesigned their entire brand identity and helped them raise 30% more donations than the previous year. "The before and after photos of their website are incredible," I said, pulling up examples on my phone. "Sometimes it's amazing what a fresh perspective can do." Susan was genuinely impressed. She started asking technical questions, wanted to see more of my portfolio. For about 10 minutes, I felt like a real person again. Someone with skills and value and something interesting to contribute. That's when Natalie wandered over. She'd been holding court by the pool all afternoon, entertaining the younger crowd with stories about her latest business conquests. But apparently, watching me have a normal conversation was too much for her to handle. "Oh, are we talking about Marissa's little hobby projects?" she said, sliding into our conversation with that signature smirk. Susan looked confused. "Hobby? This looks pretty professional to me," Natalie laughed. "Well, I mean, when you don't have real corporate pressure or serious deadlines, it's easy to make things look pretty." I felt my cheeks flush, but I tried to keep my voice steady. The nonprofit raised over $200,000 with the new campaign. That's pretty real results. "Of course it is, honey," Natalie said, patting my arm like I was a child showing off finger paintings. It's sweet that you're helping out. That's when the whole table went quiet. Marcus was suddenly very interested in his burger. Patricia was examining her manicure. Richard was deep in conversation with someone across the yard. And then Natalie delivered the line that would echo in my head for months. You know what, Marissa, if you disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then Richard let out a booming laugh. Patricia tittered behind her napkin. Marcus actually chuckled and reached for his beer. Susan looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Within seconds, the whole table was laughing. Like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I stood there, fork halfway to my mouth, feeling like time had stopped. All those years of small slights and subtle put-downs crystallized into this one perfect moment of cruelty. But here's the thing nobody expected. Instead of shrinking away like I always had before, something inside me just shifted. I set down my fork, picked up my wine glass, and stood up. Everyone was still chuckling, wiping tears from their eyes like Natalie had just delivered the comedy performance of the century. I raised my glass, looked Natalie straight in the eye, and said in the clearest voice I could manage, "Challenge accepted." The laughter died instantly. I took a long sip of wine, set the glass down, and walked away from that table for the last time. 20 minutes later, I was in my car driving toward the rest of my life. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat at every red light, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. What I'd just done. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my phone was already buzzing. Marcus, Natalie, even Patricia. But I didn't answer. I couldn't trust myself to speak without saying something I might regret. Actually, that's a lie. I couldn't trust myself not to say exactly what I was thinking. I walked into our house and just stood there for a moment. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. Like I was seeing it all through someone else's eyes. The expensive furniture that Marcus had picked out. The family photos where I always looked slightly out of place. The artwork that Patricia had helped us choose because it would complement the space better. None of it felt like mine anymore. That's when I called Claire. "I did it," I said when she picked up. I think I just blew up my entire life. She was at my house within 30 minutes, armed with coffee and boxes, and that look she gets when she's ready to burn the world down for someone she loves. "Tell me everything," she said. And I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she grinned. "Marissa, that's the most badass thing you've ever done in your life." We spent the next 4 hours methodically dismantling 8 years of my existence. Claire helped me pack clothes, personal items, anything that felt truly mine. We divided our joint savings account down the middle. I left Marcus a check for my half of the mortgage for the next 3 months. I wasn't trying to hurt him financially. I just wanted out. The hardest part was choosing what to take. 8 years of shared life boiled down to 6 suitcases and 3 boxes. My grandmother's quilt, photos from before I met Marcus, my laptop and design equipment, the coffee mug Claire had given me for my birthday that said, "World's okayest marketing genius." Marcus came home around midnight. I heard his car in the driveway, heard him call my name when he found the house half empty. I was in our bedroom closing the last suitcase. He stood in the doorway looking completely bewildered. "Marissa, what are you doing? Where are you going?" I looked at him. This man I'd loved for 8 years and realized I had nothing left to say. All the conversations we should have had, all the times he should have stood up for me, all the moments when he chose his family's comfort over my dignity. What was the point of rehashing it now? "I'm taking Natalie's advice," I said simply. "I'm disappearing." By 3 in the morning, my car was packed and Claire was hugging me goodbye in our driveway. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Phoenix," I said. It was the first city that came to mind. Warm weather, growing business scene far enough away that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone I knew. "Text me when you get there," she said. "And Marissa, I'm proud of you." The drive to Phoenix took 18 hours. I stopped twice for gas and coffee, but mostly I just drove. Mile after mile of highway windows, down music playing songs that reminded me of who I used to be before I started shrinking myself to fit into someone else's life. Somewhere around New Mexico, I started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind of crying you do when something that's been broken inside you finally starts to heal. By the time I hit the Phoenix city limits, I felt like a different person. Someone lighter, someone free. The Airbnb I'd booked was a tiny studio apartment in a converted house downtown. Nothing fancy, just clean and quiet, and completely mine. When I carried my last box up those narrow stairs, I stood in the middle of that little room and smiled for the first time in months. No family photos staring at me from expensive frames. No furniture chosen by committee. No one to impress or accommodate or carefully navigate around. Just me, a fresh start, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe Natalie had been wrong. Maybe someone would notice I was gone after all. The first few weeks in Phoenix were terrifying in the best possible way. I woke up every morning in that tiny studio apartment and had to remind myself that this was real, that I'd actually done it. I gave myself 1 week to fall apart completely, to order too much takeout, binge-watch terrible reality TV, and question every decision I'd ever made. But on day 8, I forced myself to shower, put on real clothes, and start building a life. The first thing I did was find a therapist. Dr. Martinez had an office in an old converted house downtown, and she specialized in major life transitions. Claire had insisted I needed professional help to process everything that had happened. "You've been gaslighted for 8 years," she'd told me during one of our daily check-in calls. "You need someone objective to help you remember who you actually are." Dr. Martinez was exactly what I needed. No nonsense, direct but incredibly kind. In our first session, she asked me to describe myself without mentioning my relationship to other people. I sat there for a full minute, completely stumped. "That's okay," she said gently. "That's exactly where we need to start." While I was working on rediscovering my identity in therapy, I was also trying to rebuild my career from scratch. Phoenix had a growing tech scene, and I started taking on small freelance projects. Logo design for a local food truck. Social media graphics for a yoga studio. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and reminded me that I was actually good at what I did. That's when I met Leo. He was the creative director at a startup called Phoenix Rising, which I thought was either brilliant or cheesy, depending on my mood. Claire had connected us through a friend of a friend, and Leo needed someone to help with their rebrand. Leo was everything the Hartford men weren't. Collaborative, instead of condescending. Interested in my ideas instead of dismissive. He treated me like a partner, not a subordinate. "Your portfolio is incredible," he said during our first meeting. "Why haven't I heard of you before?" "Long story," I said. "Let's just say I've been flying under the radar for a while." The Phoenix Rising project led to bigger things. Leo recommended me to other companies in his network. Word started spreading that there was a new designer in town who actually listened to what clients wanted and delivered results that exceeded expectations. 6 months in, Leo asked if I wanted to collaborate on something completely different. "There's this coffee shop downtown, Sage and Steam. The owner wants to commission a mural for the back wall, something that represents the local arts community. You interested?" I hadn't painted anything larger than a canvas since college, but something about the project called to me. Maybe it was the chance to create something permanent, something that would exist in the world long after I was gone. The mural took 3 weeks to complete. I painted it in the early mornings, before the coffee shop opened, when the light was soft and golden and the space was completely quiet. It was a Phoenix Rising, but not the cliché version. My Phoenix was made up of smaller images. Local landmarks, desert flowers, faces of the artists and musicians who performed at the cafe. When I finished, a small crowd had gathered to watch me add the final details. The cafe owner, Maria, had tears in her eyes. "It's perfect," she said. "It's exactly what this place needed." That's when I realized I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Community. People who valued what I brought to the table, instead of questioning whether I belonged there at all. The success of the mural led to my next big idea. I started offering branding workshops for local artists, musicians who needed album covers, photographers who wanted to polish their business identity, painters who had no idea how to market themselves online. The first workshop I held in the back room of Sage and Steam. 8 people showed up, and we spent 3 hours talking about visual storytelling and brand identity. By the end, everyone had a clearer vision of how to present their work to the world. "You should do this every month," suggested Maya, a jewelry designer who'd completely transformed her Instagram presence by the end of the session. So I did. Word spread quickly in Phoenix's tight-knit arts community. My monthly workshops grew from 8 people to 20 to 40. I started getting invited to speak at local business events. Leo asked me to co-present at a startup conference about building authentic brand identity. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing work that mattered with people who appreciated my contributions. But the best part, I was doing it all as myself, not as Marcus's wife or Patricia's daughter-in-law or someone trying to fit into a world that didn't want me. It's just Marissa. And apparently, that was more than enough. 18 months into my Phoenix life, I thought I'd successfully left my past behind. My business was thriving. My confidence was back, and I hadn't thought about the Hartfords in weeks. Then the email arrived. I was sitting in my favorite corner booth at Sage and Steam reviewing proposals for my next workshop series when my phone chimed. The sender's name made my stomach drop: Jennifer Walsh, creative director at Pinnacle Marketing Group. The subject line read, "Exclusive campaign opportunity, national brand launch." My first instinct was to delete it. Pinnacle was one of those big-name agencies that usually didn't work with independent contractors. But something made me open it anyway. "Dear Ms. Rivera," it began. "Your work has come to our attention through industry contacts, and we're impressed by your innovative approach to brand storytelling. We're seeking a lead designer for a major campaign launching this fall. The project involves a luxury lifestyle brand with significant market presence." The budget they mentioned was more than I'd made in the past 6 months combined, the kind of opportunity that could take my business to the next level. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of the email, in small print, was a line about the campaign launch event being hosted in partnership with Hartford Investment Group. Hartford, as in Richard Hartford, as in my ex-father-in-law. I stared at that email for 20 minutes, reading it over and over, trying to figure out if this was some kind of cosmic joke or legitimate business opportunity. That night, I called Claire. "It could be a coincidence," she said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. "Hartford's a big company. They probably partner with lots of agencies." Or, I said, "This is some elaborate setup. Maybe they found out where I am. Maybe this is their way of drawing me back." "Do you really think they care that much?" Claire asked gently. "Marissa, you've been gone for 1.5 years. Have any of them even tried to contact you?" She was right. After the first month of ignored calls and texts, the Hartfords had gone completely silent. Even Marcus had stopped reaching out after our divorce was finalized. But still, the timing felt too convenient. I spent 3 days agonizing over whether to respond. On one hand, this was exactly the kind of high-profile project I'd been working toward. On the other hand, the thought of potentially facing that family again made me physically nauseous. Leo found me stress cleaning my apartment on day 4. "You know you've reorganized that bookshelf 3 times today, right?" he said, settling into my kitchen chair with the easy familiarity of someone who'd become a genuine friend. I told him about the email about my history with the Hartfords, about my complete paralysis over what to do. "Here's what I think," Leo said after I'd finished my rambling explanation. "You're not the same person who left that barbecue 18 months ago. You're not Marcus's insecure wife anymore. You're Marissa Rivera, the designer who painted the most talked-about mural in downtown Phoenix. You're the woman who built a business from scratch and is now getting offers from national agencies. But what if seeing them again? What if it doesn't matter anymore?" he interrupted. "What if you've grown so much that their opinion literally cannot touch you?" That conversation stuck with me, But it was Claire who ultimately convinced me to take the leap. "You know what the difference is between now and before," she said during our next phone call. "Before you went to their events as Marcus's wife trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it to you. This time you'd be going as yourself. As a professional they specifically sought out and hired." She paused and I could practically hear her grinning through the phone. "Marissa, they need you now. You don't need them for anything. Do you see how completely that changes the dynamic?" I sat with that for a long moment. She was right. If this was legitimate, if Pinnacle really had chosen me based on my work, then I wasn't the desperate outsider anymore. I was the expert they'd hired to solve their problem. That night, I typed my response to Jennifer Walsh. "Thank you for considering me for this project. I'm interested in learning more about the scope and requirements. I'd like to schedule a preliminary meeting to discuss the details before committing to the campaign." Professional? Confident? The email of someone who had options and knew her worth. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Whatever happened next, I was going to face it as the person I'd become, not the person I used to be. And honestly, I was curious to see the look on Natalie's face when she realized that her little joke had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of my hotel room mirror in downtown Chicago, adjusting the straps of an emerald green silk gown that cost more than my rent. The preliminary meetings had gone better than I'd hoped. Pinnacle marketing was legitimate, the campaign was real, and somehow miraculously, Richard Hartford's involvement was purely financial. He was backing the luxury brand launch, but he wouldn't be at the gala. Just business partners and industry professionals. At least, that's what Jennifer Walsh had assured me. I'd flown in that morning, spent the afternoon in final strategy meetings, and now it was time for the big reveal. The campaign launch gala where my 18 months of work would be unveiled to a room full of people who could make or break careers. I looked at myself in that hotel mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Confident posture, professional styling, and something in my eyes that hadn't been there during my Hartford years. Self-respect, maybe. Or just the knowledge that I belonged in that room because of what I'd accomplished, not who I'd married. The grand ballroom at the Palmer House was everything you'd expect from a luxury brand launch. Crystal chandeliers, perfectly dressed tables, and the kind of networking energy that makes or breaks deals over champagne and small talk. Leo had flown in to support me, and we made our entrance together. I felt every bit the part of a successful creative director, because that's exactly what I was. The first hour went smoothly. I mingled with industry contacts, discussed the campaign strategy with potential clients, and watched with pride as people responded enthusiastically to the brand materials we'd created. Then I saw her. Natalie was across the room, stunning as always, in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my car. She was talking animatedly with a group of people I didn't recognize, wine glass in hand, commanding attention like she always did. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. I watched her face cycle through surprised confusion and something that might have been panic. She excused herself from her conversation and started walking toward me. "Here we go," I whispered to Leo. "You've got this," he whispered back. Natalie approached with that familiar smile, the one that had never quite reached her eyes. But this time, there was something different. Uncertainty, maybe. "Marissa," she said, air-kissing my cheek, like we were old friends who just happened to run into each other. "What a surprise. I had no idea you were involved with this project." "Natalie," I replied smoothly. "It's good to see you. Are you here representing Hartford Investment?" "Oh, you know Daddy's firm is backing the launch. I'm here to make sure everything goes smoothly." She paused, clearly fishing for information. "I have to ask though, did you know about the Hartford connection when you took this project?" The old me would have stumbled over that question, would have felt the need to justify or explain, or somehow make her comfortable with my presence. The new me looked her straight in the eye and said, "I was hired because of my work, Natalie. The client connections were irrelevant to my selection." Before she could respond, Leo appeared at my side with Jennifer Walsh and two executives from the luxury brand. "Marissa," Jennifer said warmly, "I'd love you to meet David Chen and Sarah Martinez. They're the visionaries behind tomorrow's product line, and they're absolutely thrilled with your campaign concept." For the next 20 minutes, I found myself at the center of a group of accomplished professionals who wanted to hear my insights, my creative process, my vision for the brand's future. They asked thoughtful questions, took notes on my responses, and treated me like the expert I'd become. I caught Natalie watching from a nearby cocktail table, her expression unreadable. When the group finally dispersed, she approached again. "Impressive presentation," she said, but her tone was cooler now. "You've certainly evolved since Phoenix." "People tend to do that when they're allowed to grow," I replied evenly. "Is that supposed to be some kind of dig at our family?" I considered my words carefully. "It's not a dig at anyone, Natalie. It's just an observation about what happens when you stop trying to fit into spaces that weren't designed for you." She was quiet for a moment, processing that. "Then, did you plan this? This whole thing seeing us again? You mean, did I orchestrate an elaborate scheme to work with a major agency on a national campaign just to prove a point to you?" I almost laughed. "Natalie, I haven't thought about any of you in months. I'm here because I'm good at what I do." That seemed to land harder than any insult would have. We stood there in awkward silence until a familiar voice said, "Marissa." I turned to see Marcus approaching, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. He was alone, no wedding ring, wearing a suit that looked expensive, but tired. "Marcus," I said, surprised by how neutral I felt seeing him. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. "You look incredible," he said quietly. "Happy." "Thank you." "I am." We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing heavy, just surface level catching up. He told me about his new job, his therapy sessions, his realization that our marriage had ended long before I left that barbecue. "I miss you," he said finally. "But I respect what you did, what you've built for yourself." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, and meant it. As he walked away, I realized that this moment right here was exactly what closure felt like. Not dramatic or painful, just complete. The rest of the evening unfolded beautifully. The campaign launch was declared a massive success. I exchanged business cards with a dozen potential clients, and Jennifer Walsh pulled me aside to discuss future collaboration opportunities. As the night wound down, I stood on the hotel balcony looking out at the Chicago skyline, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Pure, uncomplicated peace. Natalie's joke had been wrong on every level. People had noticed when I disappeared. And more importantly, they'd noticed when I came back. The morning after the gala, I woke up in my Chicago hotel room to 3 voicemails and a dozen emails. Word had spread fast about the campaign's success, and suddenly everyone wanted to work with the mysterious designer who'd appeared out of nowhere, including Richard Hartford. His assistant called while I was having coffee in the hotel lobby. Mr. Hartford would like to discuss potential opportunities with Hartford Investment Group's marketing division, she said in that crisp, professional tone I remembered so well. I almost laughed. Almost. "Please tell Mr. Hartford that I appreciate the interest, but I'm not available for new partnerships at this time," I replied. Because here's the thing I'd learned during my 18 months in Phoenix: when you know your worth, you don't need to prove it to people who couldn't see it before. Instead, I had a much more interesting conversation with Leo and Claire that afternoon. Over lunch at a little Italian place near Millennium Park, we talked about something we'd been dreaming about for months. "You know, we've been thinking about starting our own agency," Leo said, twirling pasta around his fork. "Something focused on authentic brand storytelling for companies that actually want to make a difference." Claire nodded enthusiastically. "I've got the business development experience, you've got the creative vision, and Leo understands the tech side. We could build something really special." "Rivera Martinez and Chen Creative," I said, testing out how it sounded. "Has a nice ring to it." 3 months later, that's exactly what we did. Our first client was a sustainable fashion startup run by two women who'd left corporate jobs to chase their dream. Our second was a nonprofit working to provide clean water access in rural communities. Our third was a local restaurant chain committed to sourcing ingredients from family farms. Companies with stories worth telling, people who valued substance over flash, clients who appreciated what we brought to the table instead of questioning whether we belonged there. A year later, our little agency had 15 employees and a waiting list of potential clients. We'd been featured in 3 industry publications and won 2 design awards. More importantly, I woke up every morning excited about the work I was doing. The Hartfords occasionally appeared in my peripheral vision. Marcus got remarried according to social media. Natalie was promoted to senior vice president at Daddy's firm. Patricia's charity galas still made the society pages, but they felt like characters from a story I'd read once, not people who'd shaped my life for 8 years. The real measure of how much I'd changed came 6 months ago when I ran into Patricia at a conference in Denver. She was there representing one of her charities. I was there as a keynote speaker. She approached me after my presentation looking older, but just as impeccably put together as always. "Marissa," she said, extending her hand like we were strangers. "Congratulations on your success. That was a very enlightening presentation." "Thank you, Patricia," I replied, shaking her hand with genuine warmth. "I hope you're well." And I meant it. Not because I'd forgiven them necessarily, but because their opinion simply didn't matter to my life anymore. We chatted for maybe 5 minutes about safe surface-level topics. When she walked away, I felt nothing but mild curiosity about how different my life might have been if I'd tried to earn their approval for another decade. That night, I called Claire from my hotel room. "You know what's funny?" I told her. Natalie was right. If the old me had disappeared, nobody would have noticed. But when I disappeared, I became someone worth noticing. Sometimes the cruelest thing someone can say to you is exactly what you need to hear. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to reappear as yourself. Sometimes the people who make you feel invisible are doing you the favor of showing you that you were never meant to be seen by them anyway. You are meant to be seen by people who celebrate what you bring to the world, instead of questioning whether you deserve to be there. It took me 8 years and one devastating barbecue joke to figure that out. But when I finally did, everything changed. I'm Marissa Rivera, and this is the story of how I learned to disappear on purpose and reappear on my own terms. Trust me, when I tell you this, the right people will always notice when you're gone. And more importantly, they'll celebrate when you come back stronger. The question is, are you brave enough to find out who those people really are? Have you ever had someone's cruel words actually push you to make the best decision of your life? Drop a comment and let me know your story. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when people underestimate you. Remember, sometimes the people who make you feel invisible are doing you a favor by showing you that you were never meant to be seen by them anyway.